And I am going to turn it over to Sid to kick us off and introduce our speakers.
Okay, so to begin, I'd just like to ask all of you to first reiterate your name and class year, and then after that, your current title and where you work. And after that, could you please summarize what you do in 2 sentences? So we'll start with Dr. Meacham.
Yeah. So, like Sid said, my name is Ben Meacham. I graduated in the class of 2011. Currently work as a resident physician at university hospitals up in Cleveland, Ohio. I actually work at one of their community hospitals. And as a resident physician, I'm a physician in training. So I'm basically being shuffled around between all the different subspecialties of internal medicine, which I can talk about more later, and getting exposure to the field and training to become a attending physician. And I'll finish training in about 1.5 years.
So Ms. Daoud, can you go next?
Yeah. So my name is Emily Daoud. I'm a nurse in the cardiac ICU down at Duke University Hospital. I graduated from Columbus Academy in 2012. And essentially my job is just keeping people alive. A lot of times just being with people on the worst days of their lives and providing that like human touch and all the chaos. And especially in the ICU when there's a lot of different interventions going on at the same time, trying to still keep the whole situation like humanized and what the patient wants.
And finally, Dr. Davenport.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Davenport, class of 2001. Makes me feel pretty old. So I work at a small biotech pharma company outside of Boston called Dicerna Pharmaceuticals, and I'm the head of new product planning there. So what that means is, we're a pharma company. We make medicines, and I work on working with our scientists and working in the really early stage research to try to identify what kind of drugs we're going to develop and, what diseases are we going to focus on and how are we going to develop them and for what types of patients, and then working together with other people within the company to develop a plan and a strategy for going into that.
Okay, so the first question that I have for you guys is, where did you go for your post-academy degrees? And did you feel that academy did a good job preparing you for academic success? So if any one of you wants to speak up, you can just go ahead.
Ben, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. So after academy, I went to Miami University of Ohio, down in Oxford, and got my Bachelor of Arts degree in microbiology, where I was a pre-med. And then from there, I went to Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine up in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I got my medical degree. Academy really set me up for success in that, the science courses that I took there, were pretty rigorous. I took the AP courses. It really helped out during the pre-med coursework, or while I was taking the pre-med coursework down at Miami. And I feel like I, developed some good studying habits while I was at academy because, doing pre-med and then, going on to medical school, you really have to learn how to study effectively and maintain a good work ethic. So, academy did a great job of that. I had some, I still use some of the chemistry notes in pre-med and some of the biology notes, I referred back to those. So I think academy really prepared me well for the pre-med coursework.
Yeah, I went to University of Michigan, which is the best school out there, just in case. I know Ohio, they give you the false information, but Michigan's the best. And I actually majored in English, so that's not what I do now. And I decided I wanted to do nursing after I graduated And right before I was supposed to go into public health, and I withdrew and ended up going into nursing instead. But in my undergrad, because I was going to go into dietetics as a master's degree, and I knew that I took a bunch of science classes. So in that sense, I was kind of already prepared for nursing. Academy, though, I felt like really prepared me in terms of, like Ben said, with just knowing how to study and the work ethic overall. They, like, especially in the first 2 years, I felt like I could tell a big difference between my fellow classmates at Michigan and then myself in terms of how much time people would put into an exam and how much effort it took, particularly in the science classes, and also in writing. Just huge difference in people's writing. And yeah, Miss Hogan and all the teachers just, destroyed my writing in high school. So it was much better by the time I got to college, which was very helpful. And sometimes you read people's essays and it was just like, wow, I'm really grateful for the Academy education. So I really felt like Academy prepared me very well.
And Emily Stoll, I was literally going to mention Mrs. Hogan too. So I'm glad to see that her legacy continues. So I went to, I did my college at Boston College here in the Boston area. And then I followed on with a PhD in San Diego at the University of California, San Diego, and San Diego State University. It was a joint program. And my undergrad degree was in psychology, and my PhD was in cognitive neuroscience, which is, it's to put it briefly, it's the neuroscience of how we think and behave. And I worked with individuals who had survived a stroke or brain trauma and understanding what happens in the brain after that. And yes, I was going to say writing was a big one. I had to do a lot of writing in undergrad as a psychology major. And then even in my PhD, so how many years was that after I finished high school? I was still using some of the writing skills that Mrs. Hogan taught me in applying for scholarships and fellowships. So that was a huge one. And definitely in terms of just exposure to, I would say, critical thinking at Academy was a big one and really important in all of my education. So yeah, I felt similar to what Emily said. It was very nice to get to college and feel really well prepared and feel like I was really well set up for success.
Yeah, I've definitely heard from some of the recent graduates how much the English classes have helped. So that's definitely good to know for myself too.
Yeah.
So the second question, what did you major in and how much did your major impact your post-college career choices?
I guess we'll keep going in order here. So I majored down at Miami, like I said, in microbiology. And, I kind of already knew that I wanted to go into medicine going into undergrad. So I don't know that my degree that I got at the bachelor level really influenced my decision to go into medicine. But it certainly helped, get me ready for medical school. But I will say, like, medical school, it's like totally different compared to like all the pre-med coursework. Like, only so much of it applies, and that's not a whole lot, to be quite honest. So it definitely helped me get to where I wanted to go. But it didn't really persuade me or influence me to go into my career. I'd already really made that decision already.
Like I kind of said, I majored in English, which again, not what I do now. The whole plan was to ultimately major in English and then pre-public health. And I was supposed to start my master's program my senior year of college and get a master's in dietetics. But I decided that I didn't want to do that. So I graduated a semester early, which I super recommend because then you get the second half of senior year to just hang out with your friends. Great. Anyway, and I took some prereqs and went into nursing school, which is an accelerated program, 15 months. And in terms of how much of my English was actually used, besides applying for the program, not much at all. But I still think that the English degree was worth it in the sense that being able to communicate well through writing is going to be applicable in any job that you have. So I'm not mad that I majored in English, and I loved being able to read all the books and think critically like I was able to. So it ultimately I went into nursing completely unrelated to my major. So they're kind of just two random things.
Yeah, and I've changed what I wanted to be when I grew up about 5 different times now. So I initially entered college as wanting to be pre-med, and then switched over to psychology and wanted to do sort of clinical psychology and counseling. And then once I graduated, I worked in sort of cognitive neuroscience type space with patients for a year, and realized I wanted to do my PhD in that. And then I went into my PhD, but at no point in the process would I have ever thought, yeah, I'm going to go work in pharma and biotech. It's been a, I always just kind of look at where I am now and what the next step is. And I've stopped planning 20 years in advance at this point, because things just tend to work out how they work out. But I will say that majoring in psychology was really, a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a ton. It's a super interesting field. I actually still use it at work, not to like psychoanalyze my coworkers or anything, but for other reasons. And then, doing a PhD in a scientific field, even though it's not as hard science as like what Ben said that he studied, I am able, like I said, in my job now, one of my main roles is to work with the scientists in our company and to be able to understand the science that they're doing, at least at a basic level, so that I can tie it together with sort of a business case for how we might develop a drug from what they're working on. So being able to pick up new aspects of science, new areas of science, understanding medical terminology, all of that was super, it came from both my undergrad and graduate degrees. So there's a lot that carries over, even if you're not in the exact fields that you might have majored or done a degree in.
The next question is, how did you get into your current role, and how did Academy help you get there?
So I got into my current role, basically by going through the steps, the pre-med and all that stuff. But I guess speaking to how Academy got me to get on this track, I guess is the best way to put it, is I did a lot of shadowing, and a lot of the shadowing was facilitated through Academy connections. I was able to connect with some Academy parents who really facilitated my exposure to medicine before knowing that I really wanted to do that as a career. They helped me get recommendation letters when applying to medical school and everything else. That was really key, I think, in this whole process, because one of the big questions you're going to face if you want to do medicine is, why do you want to go into medicine? So having experience and having shadowing experience is very useful. And I'm sure, Jen could get you contact information of alumni who would be willing to help, with this whole process and letting you shadow and stuff, because Alumni has a really great network. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they could really help you get the shadowing experience you need to determine if you want to choose medicine as a career.
In terms of how I got to the role as a nurse, I don't have a great answer for that. It was a spiritual decision. I did a lot of praying, and I felt like that was always what I was called to. So that's what I went into, and I absolutely love it. But I felt like Academy really gave me I got to see people do what they love every day. I got to see a lot of teachers with a lot of passion and love for their jobs. And I wanted a job that I loved as much as the people around me that I grew up around loved. And I also, so in that sense, Academy pushed me to keep looking for a job that I really felt fulfilled in. And then I also feel like Academy gave me the confidence to keep trying, and also just the love for education and the love for learning, which is so important in the health field. You know, we're constantly learning new things. We have a whole new pandemic going on. We're learning about all different drugs, all different treatments, how everything happens. And so that love for learning is something that really like drove me towards this field and made me want to go into nursing, because I get to learn every single day on my job. And I think that's so cool. So.
Yeah, I don't really, I mean, I'm a bit further away from academy. And, you know, like I said, I've been through a couple of different sort of paradigm shifts of where I want to go. And I'm still trying to figure out where I want to go and what I want to be when I grow up, which I think is fine. But I would say academy, you know, there's the practical stuff that we've all talked about in terms of just the preparation and I'll call it the hard skills of knowing how to think critically and how to write well and how to learn, but also just like how to teach yourself new things. I think I transferred, my family moved to Ohio when I was in high school. So I started academy in the middle, literally in February of my 10th grade year. So that was a really tough time to start. But it was a really supportive environment, and everyone who was there, the teachers and the fellow students and the staff all helped me like get up to speed, get integrated, and like the sense of community is something that I think is really important. I currently work in a setting where we've had, you know, I hired somebody during the pandemic and trying to like integrate him into a company that he's never been on site, right? Everything has been virtual. We're living in this sort of new, you know, virtual but still connected environment. I think the sense of community and connection is really important. So that's definitely something that I think I've carried through. And then, yeah, the other thing is just like to keep striving and keep looking for sort of similar to what Emily said, but keep looking for what fits you. You know, like there were definitely times where, you know, I was going down a path and I was like, well, what's the next step? And then that's not really for me. That's not really where I want to go. So what else do I want to do? Being able to do the research to figure out what else is out there and what other opportunities might align with my skill set and what might interest me, I think were all things that I also got from academy.
The next question is, what is something that would surprise people about the work you do?
Yeah, something that would surprise people. So I guess when people think of medicine and a doctor, in the traditional sense, they think it's all patient care, right? It's all taking care of patients. You are at the bedside all the time. If you're in the hospital, you're in patient rooms, seeing patients if you're in the clinic. I'd say the surprising part is that, you know, probably half my time is spent doing documentation.
Yeah.
Emily's nodding her head too.
So much started.
Yeah, it's so much. I really don't like that part of the job. And nowadays you have to document so much, and EMRs are different. And it's just, I feel like that takes up a lot of my time, and it didn't used to back in the day when there used to be paper charts and stuff. So that's probably the most surprising thing, is it's not all just patient care. It's definitely a lot of clerical documentation work that isn't very fun all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of documentation. Nurses don't have as much as doctors, but there's a lot of charting in your job or in our jobs. I think one other thing that would surprise people about my job would be, at least in the ICU, I have a lot of autonomy. Like I don't have to wait for doctor's orders to do a lot of what I do. I can adjust medicines on my own. And there's a lot of teaching that goes both ways. Like the doctors teach us a lot and we help them as they're moving through their residency program. So that's always cool. And then I also just think like the amount of collaboration that goes on between like the nurses, the doctors, not just the nurses and the doctors, but also like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, respiratory therapy. Everyone is involved and there's a huge team behind each patient. It's not just like a doctor and a nurse, doing everything. There's so many more people doing the work.
So for me, I work in the field of developing new drugs, and I don't know if it's surprising, but it takes a ridiculous amount of time and teamwork to develop a drug. My company that I'm with now has been around for 14 years, and we're maybe going to launch our very first drug next year. Now, all of that time hasn't been developing the one drug that we're going to launch. Several things, failed along the way, or, they reprioritized, but it's literally more than a decade probably from when you first think about maybe getting a drug. The part that I do when I am working with people to think about, like, hey, there's a disease, there's an unmet need, meaning patients still have medical needs that aren't served by the medications that are out there. Could we help fill that space? And then, boom, 10 years later, you might get a drug possibly on the market for that. So, and it's also hundreds of people working on it. And not just in our company, we work a lot with what are called contract research organizations. So we work with companies in China, in Switzerland, in Canada, all around the world that are working with us to develop drugs. So it's, I always say drug development is a team sport, and it takes a lot of time and manpower and ingenuity.
What are some of the biggest challenges you are facing or have faced in your current work role? And what are some of the struggles you anticipate in the next year or in the next 5 or 25 years?
Some of the biggest challenges, I think, I started residency last year. And being a resident there's also a significant portion of it that's, you're still learning. So, at the end of residency, you're expected to take what's called, I'm an internal medicine resident. So I have to take my internal medicine board certification exam at the end of this. You take a lot of exams. So like you have to take your medical licensing exams, which start in med school, and that's how you get your license to practice medicine just generally. But then, everyone has to be certified in something. So the board certification comes after residency. So there's always a significant amount of time that I have to dedicate to studying still. And that's a big part of training, but you also have clinical responsibilities, and you also have, like the documentation I was talking about. There's a lot of stuff going on. So finding a work-life balance, especially during residency, can be difficult. So that's probably a challenge. It's a little bit better now that I'm a second year, because my schedule's opened up a little bit compared to first year, which is called intern year. I guess another challenge I faced this year has been obviously the coronavirus pandemic. So there's a lot of uncertainty going into that. And this whole year has just kind of been a whirlwind, especially like the ICU rotations. It was very busy at times, especially like in July when I was in there. Emily has been dealing with it more than me, but you're learning a lot, but there's also a lot you don't know. So that's probably been another big challenge for me this year and in training.
Yeah, to kind of go off what Ben just said, obviously right now with the pandemic going on, I just feel like we're really stretched to our max on resources. Like in the first week of the pandemic, one of the workers at our hospital, like stole all of the gloves and gowns and hand sanitizers for our unit and like sold them on the street or something. I don't know. He ended up getting fired. But the point is, it's now our entire multiple ICUs didn't have any like PPE protective equipment. And we wore trash bags for a week, which, I don't know, it's fine, but it was just bizarre. And I just feel like we're just very stretched to our limit right now. But in terms of like general, without sounding too dark, especially in the ICU, there is a lot of death. We there's a lot of death. So just, it can kind of become easy in a sense you have to separate yourself from the patient, because if you feel every single death, you're going to be just destroyed after a month or even a week sometimes. So you have to separate yourself, but finding that balance between separating yourself from the patient so you're not feeling this emotional burden all the time, but still recognizing, you know, this is the worst day of their lives, this is the worst day of their family's life, like still keeping them human in your brain and making sure that you're still being very compassionate and fighting for them, while also not getting to a point where you're crossing a line and taking that home with you or feeling that later on. I feel like it's a big challenge.
So for me, I was mentioning, I think as the call was starting, a large part of my job is, as my boss put, I have one person that reports to me that I manage. But in the company of, I don't know, let's say we have about 285 people now at my company, I probably need to talk to at least half of them on a regular basis. And that's no exaggeration. Like research, manufacturing, our quality people, the people who manage our business relationships with partners. Like I talk to all of these people, and it's really tiring to talk all the time, but it's really tiring to talk in this pandemic situation. And so one, it's challenging in normal times, in the pre-pandemic times, it's challenging but fun to be in a role where, you know, none of these people like owe me anything, so to speak. But I need to work with them and get information from them and share information with them. And you know, we need to like come together, and I have to like steer people in certain directions for working together. And certainly in the pandemic time, it's like, it's really hard. I don't have hallway conversations anymore. I can't, you know, have lunch with somebody and build those relationships. So my role is very relationship oriented. And so that's just continually something that I will continue to work on. In our field at large, so I, as I mentioned, I live in Boston, which is one of, if not the biggest hubs for biotech and life sciences pharma companies in the US. The other places are the Bay Area, some parts of New Jersey and Philadelphia, but there's just so much here that I've said to my family, like, we can never move because I will always have a job here. I get contacted all the time by recruiters trying to, you know, pitch a different position in the area to me. So in terms of job opportunities, there are aplenty in the field here. I think some of the ways that the industry is changing and adapting to new environments. So two things. One is, you know, I think when you hear pharma has sort of a bad reputation for some things that I think there was news today about a pharma company, Purdue, that engaged in some unethical practices with marketing their opioid drugs. And, you know, I think we always like to say, and certainly, you know, I hope that I have a more ethical standpoint in how I do my work than was seen in some of these instances. But you know, one, we need to, as an industry, address some of these issues and show ways that we are like bringing value to society. And I think that we are. You know, I work for a company that makes medicines for rare diseases. So these are patients who there might be, you know, I'm working on one right now where there are maybe 1,000 patients in the entire United States with this condition. So it's really rare. It's really understudied. But, you know, we are able to maybe shine some light on that disorder, to bring awareness to it, to bring research to it. So I think in terms of significance overall, like, I'm optimistic that companies like mine are, you know, bringing new therapies, bringing at least awareness to indications. And also another important part is, like, we do a lot in terms of patient advocacy and patient support. So there's an entire function in my company that I work with a lot called patient advocacy, where we work with patient advocacy groups and helping to just spread the word about their disease. And that helps, one, patients who have the disease, they don't feel so alone. They connect with other patients who have the disease. It helps people who haven't been diagnosed understand, like, oh, I have these weird symptoms that have never been diagnosed, and I just heard about this thing. Maybe I should go talk to my doctor. So I think there's a lot of ways that, even though my industry has had some bad actors, I think a lot of us are hopefully moving in the right direction towards the betterment of society at large.
Can I just add on a thought about the field overall? Because I didn't really do that earlier.
Yeah.
And Ben, feel free to disagree or, support. But in terms of like the opportunities in nursing and just the health field in general, in terms of like hospitalization in the hospital and bedside care, one, I feel like it will always be there. And you always will have job opportunities, especially as a nurse. Like I could travel nurse. Travel nursing is a thing. You get paid to go to different hospitals across the United States, and they pay for your living expenses or for housing, and you get paid a ton of money to work in random cool places. So I have a friend who's, in Hawaii, in California. I have another friend there's all over the place. But in terms of how the field is heading and growing, I do think not so much for nursing, but just in general, I feel like there's going to be a much larger demand for nurse practitioners and PAs as the patient population, like as there's more patients and just more hospitals and more people on insurance. So that's a great field to look into if you're interested in the health field and, MD or nursing or pharmacology isn't for you. PA and NPs have a lot of autonomy as well, and, are incredibly smart and work really hard, but it's slightly different hours, a little bit easier for the work-life balance than MDs, a little bit more knowledge and autonomy than nursing. It's kind of like an in-between, and that's a role that's really growing and has a lot of flexibility. And yeah, it's just a really interesting position. So I would advise you guys to check that out as well.
Yeah, and I guess I also didn't touch on the future of medicine. So over the next, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I'm sure most of you have noticed that, the age of private practice, unless you're like, a plastic surgeon or an orthopedic surgeon, it's kind of coming to an end. Most physicians now will work for a major health organization or some sort of healthcare conglomerate, whatever we want to call it. So, you have people in executive positions who aren't physicians for the most part, telling you have to meet this metric or that metric or provide care to this number of patients on a daily basis. And I don't know that that's necessarily a positive thing, but that's the way the field's going. So, most physicians are going to be employed, I think, over the next, decade, if they aren't already. I think in terms of job opportunities, traditionally, our healthcare system, the jobs a lot of people want are those that involve a lot of procedures because those people get paid more as physicians. I think there's have started to be this push towards primary care because that's where healthcare is going. Is they're trying to push medical students to pursue primary care as their specialty, family medicine, specifically. And I think as we go through the next 5-10 years, there's going to be more incentives for medical students to pursue primary care as a career choice. So that's where I kind of see everything going over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Sid, before you jump in with the next question, we have a couple from the audience, if you don't mind. So the first one good. Is for Ben and Emily. And you previously mentioned the documentation. And so did this aspect of the positions push you away from the career at all? Or is it something that is manageable and it's not a deterrent?
Ben, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of the job. I mean, it's not necessarily a deterrent. I enjoy seeing patients. I enjoy, being the investigator and doing the investigative work of diagnosing and treating a patient. And all the bedside interaction is great. That's why I do it. The documentation is just part of it. I mean, there's always going to be downsides to a job. Mm-hmm. And in this case, just having to, after you see the patient and you round and you do all the fun stuff, you have to sit down at a computer and type a note about what happened. There's a lot of medical, legal jargon you got to include in notes, and yeah, it's not great, but it's just part of it and we deal with it. So
yeah, Ben's notes are much more important than mine. Documentations, it's true. Sometimes my notes are literally like patient, like, X, Y, and Z, like literally 3 sentences. And it's like, will continue to monitor. That's my entire note. Because, obviously if you're a physician who's providing care, and especially if you're in a clinic, like the patient has to be able to look back and know like what happened, and other physicians need to be able to look back and figure out what, was going on in that patient's care. For nursing, a lot of my documentation is more like close assessment. So I'm like in the chart documenting in terms of, what that patient's, blood pulse was, what their skin looked like, how warm it was, when their last bowel movement was. These are real things that we document. And sometimes it can be a little bit tedious, but at the end of the day, if a patient's really sick and you're doing a ton of stuff, it's more about for nursing anyway, it's more about like doing the things and getting it done. And then later you go back and you document, and you might end up staying late a little bit, but it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't take away from the job. Like you're mainly there to do the work, and that's what I love about it. And you can kind of skimp on the documentation on my side, not on Ben's, but on my side. I can do a little fluff. It's fine.
Well, thank you. And then we have one for Kathleen. Can you talk a little bit more about your cognitive neuroscience course and what you did in that, and if that would be something that you would recommend students to take and explore?
Yeah, because I love it. I love talking about it. So you're gonna be sorry you asked this question. Yeah, what I did, so this is for I got interested in sort of cognitive neuroscience and neuroscience when I was in doing my bachelor's degree in psychology at Boston College. And I was doing actually an internship at the one of the Harvard Medical School hospitals, doing research with a neurologist. And he was studying how the brain, I don't know if you've heard about this concept of neuroplasticity, the brain reorganizes itself potentially after trauma or damage. And so, for instance, you could see individuals who had a stroke and they'd lost the ability to speak, but you could, do some type of therapy. And the therapy he was investigating was actually having them sing instead of speak, and seeing how their brains sort of rewired, so to speak, to allow them to regain some communication ability. And he was doing magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs, to look at what's happening in the brain. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, you get to put somebody in a scanner, see what's happening in their brain almost in real time. I was like, I have to do this. So so I went and did a PhD. And like I said, I was working with both kids who had language impairment. So, from a variety of language impairments, or adults who'd had different types of brain trauma. And in my PhD, I got to take classes. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I was across 2 campuses. So I got to take classes at the medical school with the medical students, neurology classes. I got to take classes with people who are doing their PhD in clinical psychology to understand, what goes into that. And I got to run an MRI scanner and like put people in it and scan their brains, which was pretty awesome. So I'm happy to always talk more about that, but it's a pretty cool thing. And I'll just say, the only I'm like super excited, and you're like, why didn't you, do more of that? It's because I realized I didn't, like, the career path from there was become a professor and do research forever. And the challenge there is not to get too far afield, you have to write grants to usually the federal government to fund your own research, to fund your own work. And I just could not write grants for the rest of my life. And that was just, the funding environment was really challenging to get grants. And it was just like, I like to do the science and I like to think about the science and talk about it. But I guess it's similar to what you guys are talking about with the documentation. It's like, I just could not deal with that. So now I get to work in a field where I don't have to do the science, but I get to talk about the science and understand the science and still be, touching the science without having to ask the federal government to pay for it at this point.
That was excellent. Thank you. And it's very clear that you are very excited and passionate about that. So those are all the questions I have. Sid, if you want to hop in with your next question.
Ms. Conte, I actually have a question of my own. Is it okay if I go ahead and ask it? So
yes,
I was
absolutely.
wondering, and I think this applies to all of your fields, but I was wondering, what do you think is the general time frame after college and undergraduate? How long does it really take to enter your career and start practicing?
Ben, want to go ahead?
I can go. Yeah, sure. A while for me. So residency, there's different fields you can go into, and each field is going to have a certain, this is after med school. So you do your undergrad, then you do 4 years of med school, and then you have residency. And residency is anywhere from 3 to 7 years, depending on what you want to do. Neurosurgery being the 7-year residencies. And I guess I'll speak more to internal medicine. So internal medicine is 3 years. So I'm doing a 3-year residency, and I'm probably just going to practice internal medicine when I'm done as a hospitalist, working primarily in a hospital, taking care of hospitalized patients. That role, I can talk about it more later. It's basically you're kind of spearheading the patient's care. Patients get admitted to you, and you decide which consultants need to be on the case, cardiology or nephrology, and they come and see the patient, and you manage their care all the way through discharge as a hospitalist. Now with internal medicine, if you decide to specialize, so there's so many different subspecialties of internal medicine. I don't know if you know this, but all cardiologists, nephrologists, which are kidney doctors, pulmonologists, infectious disease doctors, they all have to do fellowships after their internal medicine training, but they all do internal medicine first. So those are called internal medicine subspecialties. And so if you want to be a cardiologist per se, you have to do 3 years of internal medicine training. And then after that, do another 3-year fellowship in cardiology to become a cardiologist. So it really depends on how long you're going to do your postgraduate training, and it all depends on what you want to do. But it can be at the minimum 3 years. Usually, for a lot of other people, it's longer before you become an attending physician.
On the flip side, nursing, you could literally do a 4-year degree at any university. Some universities are 3 years, and then you are a nurse as soon as you graduate. There's different levels of nursing, of course. So there's a charge nurse who's kind of more in charge of the unit and does a lot more, can sometimes do more administrative stuff. Depending on the hospital, sometimes new nurses aren't allowed in ICUs, but yeah, it could literally be 4 years. And then there are some people who started in the ICU at 21 or 22 as nurses. And yeah, and you have a lot of support. You learn the majority of nursing, which is honestly probably true for all jobs in the hospital, is actually you learn a lot on the job. So your 4 years is just to make sure you're not going to do anything so dumb that you're going to kill someone the first few weeks. And then the rest of it is just you learn what's happening on your unit. And it's nursing. You can go out. When you finish nursing school, you're trained to be a nurse that could work in the emergency department, in labor and delivery, in an ICU, in all different areas. So what you learn, like what you decide to go into, you pretty much learn on the job. And then whenever you want to, you switch to a different specialty or a different unit and you kind of start over at the bottom.
So for me, like I would say I'm going to give two answers. The specific role that I'm in does not require a PhD. I happen to have one. It happens to be useful. But there are plenty of people who either just go straight from college, maybe go into consulting for a couple of years, or just start at the, at a low level, entry level at a pharma company. I would say, contrary to what you might think, it's easier to get those entry level jobs at bigger companies, and at smaller companies like mine, they tend to want to hire people who have experience and expertise because there's like no slack, so to speak. But larger companies like Pfizer, Novartis often have like internship programs or co-ops with universities. There's a local university here in Boston that actually they have like a 5-year program, and they have a full 1-year co-op where they'll send people to go work in different industries. And then usually after they graduate, they might get a role in that industry. So that's the answer for my role. And then within the pharma industry, it really, it depends on, if you're going to be a scientist, then yeah, you've got to have a scientific background, although not all the scientists I work with have a PhD. Some of them have a bachelor's and then they've worked their way up in the lab. So it could be anywhere from, just straight out of undergrad. I would say that most people who I consider myself sort of at the intersection of business and research, and most people on the business side usually have like maybe at least 2 to 3 years of experience, get an entry in consulting or something before they go in, call it in-house into pharma. So a few years out of undergrad.
Okay, and now I'll just skip to the last question since we have to wrap up in a few minutes. So looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self as you were first starting your career? I think you're muted right now.
Yeah, Ben, I can't hear.
Sorry about that. I'm back. The advice I would give is, it's a lot of work. There's going to be always too much studying to do. And everything's going to be stressful no matter what. So don't get bogged down with the stress, and do your best, put your best effort forward, but don't worry about what's going to come down the line. Just put your best effort forward and let the cards fall where they may, because you can't let things catch up to you because there's just too much stuff to worry about. That's pretty much it.
I'm still super new in my field because it's technically my second career. So I've only been a nurse for 2 years. So it's kind of just like speaking to myself last year. But I would say, kind of similar to Ben, like there's always going to be so much that you need to know or that you feel like you need to know, and there's just no way to know it all. So study what you can, but don't kind of beat yourself up when you don't know everything. And then I also would say that one of the best things about nursing is that there's the flexibility of moving to different units or different specialties. So I don't need to stay at a job. My first position I didn't love, and I thought like, well, I just have to stay here for X amount of time. Like that's just is what it is. I can't start over. I've already done a whole year, which is nothing. And realizing that like the beauty of nursing is that I can switch to any specialty I want at any point, and you just have to put in the effort to get caught up and want to learn. So that's kind of the two things I would tell myself.
Yeah, for me, I think I already alluded to it earlier, which is like your career doesn't have to be a straight line, and you don't have to. First of all, there is no end goal. I mean, like we're all evolving and changing and learning along the way, and I think even if you are someone who gets a terminal degree, like Ben becoming a physician and practicing physician, it's not like he's going to be a physician and then that's it. Like you'll still be growing and learning throughout your entire career, and you never know where life is going to take you or what might interest you, and maybe you want to go a slightly different path, or and that's okay. And you know what? It's not the end of the world. I changed my mind so many times, and it's really, the other thing is, it's so interesting. There are so many careers out there that I never knew existed when I was in high school, like, for instance, mine. So it's fun to keep learning and talking. I love talking to people about what their careers are and how they've gotten there. I literally just had some of these conversations a couple weeks ago. Like, I see that you do this. How did you wind up in that role? And then just hearing their stories. And everyone is like, oh yeah, I did this for a few years, and then I did this for another few years. And so it's really common and normal to change and keep pivoting, I think, throughout our lives.
I think is a great note to end on. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight, for Sid for leading us through the conversation, and to our panelists, Ben and Emily and Kathleen. It was great to hear from you and to hear what you're doing and all the great things that you're getting to. And I've got so many more questions, and hopefully we'll get a chance to follow up a little bit later sometime soon to see how things are going with you guys. So thank you all. We appreciate the time, and it was so great to see you all.